And if we go back to newspapers, radio, television, marketers always operated kind of in this renter capacity where you essentially gave a commercial entity money, right? And you paid rent to access their commercial infrastructure. That could be their distribution network. It could be their printing press, so on and so forth. And the audience that they commanded with those assets. So throughout history, and this would go back to the 18th century and the earliest British newspapers. That was the model.
Welcome to Business Ninjas, brought to you by WriteForMe, where you'll hear from business leaders who are out there growing their business and slaying it every day. Learn from the masters. Let's get started.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Business Ninjas. I'm here today with Quimby Melton, co-founder and CEO of Confection. How you doing today, Quimby?
Doing great, Andrew. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for spending some time with us here on Business Ninjas.
Pleasure.
Please tell us a little bit about yourself and about Confection.
My name is Quimby Melton, like you said, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Confection. We are a solution that helps businesses generate better marketing data from their outbound sales and marketing efforts, as well as their inbound traffic.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
So before Confection, I ran an agency called Studio Hyperset, and my co-founder and I partnered there to build websites and web apps and build marketing campaigns. And actually, the origin story of Confection is embedded in an agency experience where one day one of our customers emailed us and said, "Why do our CRM forms not appear in this browser called Brave?" And if you're familiar with Brave, it's a privacy forward browser that blocks a lot of traditional marketing or digital marketing assets by default. So third-party cookies are out, cross-domain scripts generally are out. What was happening is the form, when it brought in, when it loaded itself, it brought in analytics scripts with it. Brave blocked the analytics scripts, and as a result, the form didn't display. So that was kind of a hard stop from a marketing operations standpoint. When we dug into the issue, we realized that we blocked the analytics scripts. You also block page views. And then the downstream effects of that are catastrophic in terms of you lose session intelligence, what people are doing on your site, acquisition information, and so on and so forth. So the page view, to be a vanity metric, is actually really, really important in terms of its technical function, in terms of allowing other things to happen. So once we saw that, sometimes I describe that as kind of like falling in love in a way. When I saw these blocked event scripts, I knew that this was going to be part of my life for a good long time. So it was such an interesting challenge. So we get to work building it. And Confection, in essence, addresses those challenges of not having control over your, what we call atomic level digital marketing data.
Do I assume that it's Confection because you help dealing with cookies?
Yes. So one of the original names we considered was Cloud Cookie, but everyone hates cookies. So it was a non-starter on that. So we went with Confection instead.
Sure. Confection makes you smile and doesn't necessarily think that somebody's got a magnifying glass into your your search history. Okay. And what verticals do you service?
Well, we service marketers, period. Our customers are marketers. Those marketers work in different capacities. I would say generally most of our customers are e-commerce interests. They're highly impacted by these data disruptions. But we also work with people who would work at corporate digital marketing departments, agencies as well. And then of course, software marketers, that's our bread and butter. Software marketers, essentially. So really marketers in any number of different verticals, we work with them. But I would say for the most part, they're e-com, corporate, and agencies.
So quietly, you are able to disrupt the disruptors, as it were, the people who are trying to keep information from getting downstream. Is that in effect what you're doing?
I think it's a fair summary. I would maybe position it a little bit differently.
A little more politely than I just put it on.
Well, for us, having been marketers, in an agency capacity, people in those roles really need accurate information to make good decisions about spending behavior on ads, and also to make revenue-based decisions. I mean, the intel that's generated from simple page views and other types of, again, atomic level digital marketing data is mission critical for my people, the professional marketers. I would say too, in the beginning of Confection, I kind of thought that we could come up with a technology solution that would balance the interests of people as well as marketers. And we do have some basic controls there where people can choose to collect information in a GDPR compliant manner, for example. Now I sort of think that we're only going to solve this really thorny social issue at a higher level in terms of philosophy. So when I go out and have these kinds of conversations, I say, we operate from the position that data, digital marketing data, is a public resource. So in that way, it's a lot like air, it's like water, it's like code and language. These are things we all engage with, things we change, things that we benefit from. And if anything, I'd like to see companies do a much better job of educating people on this is why we collect this information. This is what we do with it, and this is how it benefits you every day. So again, these days I really try to operate at a higher level and convince people in terms of social utility and kind of framing it in terms of air and water.
Sure. I can't imagine a world where our CRM doesn't populate properly and that I can't see what's going on with somebody's website.
That's it.
That's critical data.
Andrew, I think that's what fanatics, like privacy fanatics, miss is the social utility of this and how it impacts them, and it makes their life better every day. So I'm with you on that. I think the genie's out of the bottle. And in the same way that we had to invent the EPA to keep the Cuyahoga River from catching on fire, we need basic privacy regulations to make sure that this important social resource is used in a meaningful way, a non-abusive way. But at the same time, the idea that we're going to suddenly go back to the Mad Men age of audience-based marketing in print is laughable.
Yeah, it's definitely a double-edged sword, right? People love to talk about security and privacy, but they also like the convenience of going to a website and that website remembering what it is you like and what you want to buy and how you behave and all those sorts of things, and connecting your banking with this site and that site and all kinds of stuff. If all of that stopped overnight, people would scream bloody blue murder, but it's all in the name of privacy.
Well, I think some of those people misunderstand the kinds of information. By and large, so first of all, Confection is engineered not to collect things like passwords or social security numbers, things like that. So generally, I think people, if we took them through, if they give us the opportunity to take us through and say, look, this is what we collect, they're like, well, I don't particularly care that you saw that I went to a particular page on a particular site on a particular day, so on and so forth. That's not particularly threatening in any kind of way, but it is immensely valuable to the people who operate the site, right? And at the end of the day, too, we have to find ways to offset the cost of operating these sites, and it's never free. So, paying for access is one way to get that done. The other thing is sort of data exhaust and the value of data exhaust. And so, I've made my camp, and I'm willing to go to the mat for this particular argument on this particular point. So I think a lot of the privacy fanatics are kind of misinformed and naive in the way they approach this. And I love having these conversations because I think it's a really interesting topic, and I think that there's better conceptual and philosophical models we can build around this information.
Hey, the average person has never read an update to terms of service because they don't want to spend the time, so they just click yes, and they have no idea what is going on at that point, right?
Well, Andrew, when we were kids, right, remember you had phone books, right, and your address was in the phone book, and so sometimes I'll use that as an example where I don't care if someone sees what site I visit, in a JSON log or something like that. I would much rather have that versus my address in a phone book where somebody can come to your house or something like that. So we have a historical context for having pretty revealing personal information out there in a free resource like a phone book. And I think when we compare those two, you can start to see why some of these arguments are sort of silly and fall apart.
Absolutely. What makes you guys stand out from your competition? I assume there is some competition in your space.
There is, for the most part, what we try to do is when we tackled this problem is we really wanted to build a very different kind of architecture, one that didn't rely on traditional front-end mechanisms of moving data around. So we built a different kind of architecture that is very performant in these new contexts that we find ourselves operating in. And so from my point of view, that's what's the most exciting thing is when we'll go out and run a pilot and we'll maybe compare a well-known analytics platform natively, and then one enabled with Confection, the same property enabled with Confection. And the difference between the two is quite large in terms of both data quantity as well as data quality. And, we run several of those a month, and I never get tired of seeing the results. Very interesting. So the architecture that we have works very differently than traditional methods, and it's very performant in this new reality we find ourselves in.
Excellent. And who are your customers? What kind of companies do you work best with?
Yeah, so let's just start with e-com. Not a target. when I built this, I thought I was building a solution. I thought Bruno and I were building a solution for marketing operations teams at software companies, because those were our customers at Studio Hyperset. That's my world. Those are the people I know. But ecom is really highly impacted by these changes. So we found really good traction with ecom. And this is another way to have, sort of privacy fanatics maybe miss this, that, most e-commerce companies are not doing huge amounts of business. It might be a side hustle for someone. It might be the extension of a small business in a small town, right? And so for these folks, if they're not able to generate good data, when they're spending gobs of cash on ads and they can't make good decisions about where to do, which channel is performing well, these small businesses definitely suffer. So we do very well with e-com because they're highly impacted by these changes and the resulting inability to make decisions about where they're spending digital ads. And then also software companies, because they're very technology literate, in terms of marketing companies. It's an easy sell in that way, where they're living with these compromised dashboards, and it's easy for them to pick this up and run with it. And the last would be your general corporate marketers at a apparel company or a food company or something like that.
Any particular? Sure.
But just like the last one would be agencies as well, because the basis of the relationship between an agency and its client are good reporting, right? So for agencies, it's very important as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's critical data.
Yes.
I regularly go to, I see sites that claim to be completely clean and not collecting your data, but they still have to continue to exist and be cost effective. So I know it's not
right.
It's not the most transparent statement in the world when I see it on a headline on a website.
Yes.
What other problems are you solving for your clients other than just access to that raw data?
Well, that's a good question. I think for me, again, kind of back to a higher level, I've been running this through my mind a lot in terms of historically, what was marketing as a discipline,
Mm-hmm.
And if we go back to newspapers, radio, television, marketers always operated kind of in this renter capacity, where you essentially gave a commercial entity money, right? And you paid rent to access their commercial infrastructure. That could be their distribution network. It could be their printing press, so on and so forth, and the audience that they commanded with those assets. So throughout history, and this would go back to the 18th century and the earliest British newspapers. That was the model. So, as this existing system begins to kind of shudder, right, and show its age, in a digital marketing context, I think marketers are going to start to operate more as builders. So for me, even beyond just the decision-making capacity that we give our customers, we really give them ownership over their primary data sets. So for us, step one is take control over your atomic level digital marketing data. Once you've done that, you've gained what we call data independence, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now you can operate independent of other systems. You build up your own data lake or your own data resource. You can send it wherever you want, including back into your ad vendors and other third parties vendors that you want to work with. But the important thing is that you're in control. And I think this is a real sea change for marketers, moving from marketing as renting to moving to marketing as owning, as a capital. And I think that's very exciting. And Andrew, just in the past week, I've had calls with fairly large businesses who say they're going either agency free. These are companies that are essentially, for whatever reason, don't feel like the value is there anymore, right? And they're beginning to build things in-house. So it's been a very encouraging shift away from this marketing as renting and towards marketing as owning and building in-house. So very interesting times ahead.
Another sign of that shift is that I've spoken to a number of agencies that don't want to refer to themselves as ad agencies anymore.
It does not surprise me.
They don't want to shut doors by having an archetypal concept of what they are and what they can do. They want to be more agile and flexible, so they refer to themselves in 21st century ways. But that speaks.
It's really interesting.
Shift.
I haven't heard that, but that doesn't surprise me, and I think it's very interesting. I think faith in systems is very important, right? And the people that we chat with, faith in the systems are that they already use, and these would be systems that we all know very well. Household name technology businesses is at an all-time low, right? And that does bleed over into agencies. And for the record, I hurt for agencies. As a previous agency person myself, if they're in a tight spot, because within that relationship, that renting relationship, agencies are essentially the first line renter, right? And then the client is almost a subletter, right? They essentially pay the agency to rent on their behalf. And they're in a tight spot, because a lot of them are not terribly technology literate in the sense that they're not building their own systems, right? They're dependent on large technology companies to provide them good information and get back to their customers. So I do hurt for them, and I understand a difficult position that they're in. And this is going to be an important shift for them as well.
Hey, it's a funny time in terms of data. When I can
Yes.
sit in front of a friend with my phone, I'm not going to say off, but in sleep mode, right? The screen is off, have a conversation, and then 30 seconds later, something we've just discussed is being sold to me on Facebook. That's a level of data invasion that is pretty hard to get past. I mean, I respect the moxie of the advertisers and the technology to be leveraged that way. But there are ears just about everywhere in terms of our consumption and the things that we're looking for. And here it is, right? It's a slippery slope right now. Tell me about
That
the last.
underscores the value of it as well. Your idea that we're not going to go back, we're not going to give this up. I mean, it's like you're not going to stop mining for gold, right? So I think
No,
that's a really good case study. Yeah,
look, in terms of technology, it's always a double-edged sword, right? Everybody
true.
loves convenience. People like to be able to take their phone, tap it on a device in a store, and pay for something. They
Right.
want to be able to go, oh, I left the lights on. Let me turn them off from 1,000 miles away. But the more interconnected we are, the more hackable we are, right? There are no more devices without computers. Your car is hackable. Your home is. So it's a slippery slope. I mean, technology is a tool. It can be used for good or evil, right? And we can only hope that all of our providers are secure with our data and want to serve us as opposed to bilk us, as it were, or profit
Definitely.
off of our data. I mean, look, I don't begrudge companies profiting off of our data. It has to happen, right? Everybody needs to sell their products and services. Um, Tell me.
And for whatever it's worth, but I would draw a firm line between the kind of thing that we do, which is essentially facilitating data exchange, first party data exchange for that matter. And we don't turn around and sell anything. In fact, we kind of have that that bothers me as much as anything else when you're selling information to third parties. Like that's not something that we do, and it's certainly not something that I'm particularly a fan of either. I am in favor of first party data exchanges between companies and their customers,
Mhm.
and I'm in favor of first party exchange information that allows my people, marketers, to make better decisions.
Well, hey, I'm glad you feel that way. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad that someone who has the power to alter the way that data is used feels that way. It's important to know. Tell me about the COVID years. How you guys been able to grow your business in the last couple of years?
That's a great question. We've always been remote. I mean, I've been working remote since before it was cool, all the way back to 2006, 2007. So it didn't really impact us that way. I think people having more time to think about these and other issues, I think was ultimately a benefit for us in the sense of, before early 2020, we were caught in a sort of frenetic world of commuting and things like that. Then the world just kind of slowed down. And I think it gave us a chance to evaluate ourselves personally, right? Our relationship with our family and friends. That was very positive. And in a business context too, I think people had a little bit more space to think about the big picture and evaluate long-standing relationships and stop taking things for granted. So from my point of view, I think philosophically, it was like a good moment because it allowed people to pause and think and evaluate their stacks. And am I getting what I think I'm getting? So from that point of view. So at this point, COVID, if anything, acted as an accelerant for us, just like any other digital technology company. We've gotten to the point where, our customer acquisition costs and their lifetime value is very positive for us now. We've never had any positive churn. So, we've been able to maintain, a steady negative 25 to 30% churn. And we've got a nice gross margin versus our cost of goods sold. So decent traction. And also, again, with COVID, I think it gave people time to think and digest and think in new ways.
Oh, I 100% agree that everyone was forced to reassess just about everything, and everyone is now interacting in a more of a digital landscape than ever. You may have been working remotely for 15 years, but most people were not. That includes.
Most people were not.
So people are far more aware of their data and how it is coming back at them. Again, when you open up any sort of platform like Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and things are being shown to you that you searched for or you didn't search for, you just spoke about, it's right here, right now, in terms of how that data is being used and how it impacts you. Tell me about content and content marketing and its role in growing your business, getting your story out there.
Right. Well, this is definitely a place where we overlap, Andrew, in terms of the value of content. So before Confection, before the agency, I was an English major and wanted to be an English professor. So I kind of have a natural bias towards content and the power of content. So, and I was thinking about this question a little bit before this, and I kept going back to, Shelley, the Romantic poet. He's got this great essay, The Defense of Poetry, right? And he says that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world in that essay. That's the last line.
Okay.
And I think it's interesting because a lot of times I think about that in terms of marketers, like that marketers are also the unacknowledged legislators of the world. And I think from that point of view, content is everything, right? Like in our case, we're really kind of at war with ignorance. Like I don't see us competing with an entity or anything like that. I see us competing with an entrenched set of ideas that are very problematic. So from my point of view, content helps break that down just as it always has, in terms of like revolutionaries writing essays and things like this, right? Upstart kind of groundswelling movements have always involved content literacy and exploring your ideas through content. So I think the value of content and content marketing cannot be overstated.
You are speaking my language, ladies and
Yes.
gentlemen. I did not pay this gentleman to say those words. I just want you to know that a little.
Well, I think that was one of the most exciting turns in the last, let's say, 15 or 20 years, where people realized the importance of content, character development, original programming like this, and the power of that. And I think that was it was good for English majors, people who think like we do, because the fact of the matter is storytelling, in a business context is just as important as storytelling in other contexts as well. So, again, you didn't pay me to say it. I just happen to believe it. The content is king.
You're speaking my language. I believe in this day and age, when we have to meet this way in 2D in front of a laptop, your website has to live and breathe. There has to be human fiber and connectivity. People have too many options. They got to know why they should be doing business with you. And they like knowing who you are and what your story is. Because, again, they got to connect. It's not just always dollars and cents. Yeah, a lot of people shop that way for goods and services. But at the end of the day, if you have 1,000 options, it can't just be the bottom line. There has to be another reason to do business with somebody. And the story is important. And if you tell it well, sky's the limit.
You got it. And Andrew, I think what you're talking about, like dollars and cents, that comes down the road as part of a longer journey. Right. So the idea is the initial connection, it has to be about shared interests, shared values, and a story that's compelling and why people want to join your story. There's another poet, he's a contemporary poet, his name's David White, and he has this great line that one line of poetry can change your life. And I think about that all the time, again, in a marketing context, where like one line of marketing collateral can change your whole perception of the world.
Absolutely. Hey, I'm older than you. Elementary school was in the 70s for me. Think about the taglines and jingles that captured people at a time where there was no internet. There were half a dozen television channels. So, if you wanted, I try to explain to kids now, if you wanted to watch a television program, you had to be in front of the TV at a given time and place, right?
Right.
There were no recording devices and DVRs. So the power of the ad agency to try to capture that little tagline that would stay with you forever. I mean, that was paramount. So,
people forget the kind of the limited number of channels that you had to, and by channel, I mean like information distribution mechanisms, right?
Yep.
So I didn't become a dad as I was almost 40, right? So there's almost like a 2-generation gap between me and my son, for example. And what's interesting about that is the kind of what you're saying, where he's never had a part of his life where it wasn't filled with digital technology. And those are two very different worlds. Going, like you said, a family sit around squabbling about what show they're going to watch because there's only 3 channels, right? To everyone having his own device and doing following your own path in that way. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, really. But I agree with you that it can be very difficult to explain our past realities. I grew up in the 80s, so not so different from you, right? Yeah. To explain that reality to people now, it's like apples and oranges. I mean, it's very, very different.
Hey, we're in a world where people are spending $6-7 million for a 30-second spot during the Super Bowl. If you had told someone that 30-40 years ago, they would have laughed at you. That's the entire budget for a corporation across the board and across the globe for the year. What do you mean 30 seconds? But that's where we are, right?
It's amazing the value of the Super Bowl ads has remained so high. I mean, it wasn't this year, it was the year before, where the one company had a QR code, right? It was kind of like that was the blockbuster one. Pretty smart, because you're able to, I mean, that's really thinking in digital terms, right? Where your idea is to build a funnel and bring people in and then begin to engage them. That was really smart. But I mean, for your average Super Bowl ad, it's amazing they've been able to keep the kind of the inflationary pressures on the value of those ads, given what's available to us now.
I've always thought it would be cagey to have an ad where your logo and or a QR code would be static, even if someone were fast forwarding through the commercial, because people do that on their DVR.
Yeah, that I think it's a great point. Yeah, that was a killer concept. Yeah, that's an interesting point, because it doesn't move, and everything else does. That's interesting. Maybe that was part of the strategy. Yeah.
Okay. What is something that you would like to be celebrating personally and professionally 1 year from now?
I think Bruno, my co-founder, and I, we were talking about this just the other day, where for us, in a year, I would like our customers, especially, and the people that we will engage with for the next 12 to 18 months, to think something very simple, which is, it's crazy that we didn't do this all along, right? It's crazy that we relied on error-prone second and third parties to generate our primary data sets. Now we feel so empowered. We feel very good. We feel in control. We feel independent. These concepts are really important to us, and I think we'll get there. So in a year, 18 months, I want people to be thinking, it was crazy the way we did things before. This is such a better way for us to own our information and to be in control of our own spending, our own decision-making, and our own primary data sets.
And personally, what would you like to be celebrating personally?
Well, it's easier. If you're a dad, you already know the answer to that question, which is essentially, I just want my family to be healthy and happy.
Hey, in this new world of COVID, et cetera, and every new virus around the corner, that is no small task. So
it's easy. Once you become a parent, that's like all you really want. So
yeah, I've got a high schooler on my hands who is about to join my auto insurance policy.
in Southern California.
In Southern California. So, yeah, that's another rabbit hole. Quimby Melton of Confection, it's been lovely having you. Please tell us what's your URL where they can find your confection. Let me try that again. Quimby Melton of Confection, it's been lovely having you here today. Please tell everyone what your URL is, where they can find confection, and what social media outlets you're using these days.
You got it. Personally, I'm most active on LinkedIn. You can find me and Confection there on LinkedIn. And our URL is just confection.io. You can find information about us there. Those are probably the two best resources. But really appreciate you having me on the podcast today, Andrew. I enjoyed our conversation. I think it's a really important topic, so I appreciate the opportunity to share it with your audience.
Happy to help shed a light on people doing good out there with digital data, because it is important. People are gun shy, and they think that anybody looking at their personal data there's something nefarious going on. So I'm glad to know that there are people with your head and heart out there in the space. So Quimby Melton of Confection, thank you for being with us today. I wish you and your family and your company continued health and success.
Thank you, Andrew. Same to you.